Hey, what's up, people? It's Teal Gamer, and yes, I am now also talking about the new AMD Ryzen 9800 X3D, as well as some of the stuff with NVIDIA, and I'm also going to be calling out a lot of all these channels that are, showcasing this chip, praising it as the end-all, be-all, saying it's burying in Intel, and all this other garbage. And I'm also going to be giving information about what people don't know and what is not being talked about. So that being said, let me get right into it and start by saying the information I'm giving you is factual. Okay, I'm not going to sit and get into debates with people, well, how do you know this, that, and the other thing? Because people have been so brainwashed with this that even though I'm saying what is factual and I'm going to tell you how to check it out and check on it, that people will still say that's not right, because these people are in these positions where they think they're the arbiters of knowing all of this stuff because they do reviews on these things. However, they don't actually know half of the stuff that they're talking about. So let me get right into this. So the first thing I'm going to be getting out of the way is every channel that I've watched, and I've watched a lot of them in the past week, every single one of them are all giving misinformation regarding the AMD Ryzen 9800 X3D. So first thing I'm going to get out of the way is this is not a gaming CPU. Okay, it's not the fastest gaming CPU on the planet. The word gaming is a marketing gimmick, and it doesn't actually exist being attached to any actual PC component or product. Okay, it just doesn't, unless it's a game itself. There is no such thing as a gaming monitor. There is no such thing as a gaming PC. And I'm not the first person to talk about this. But let me give you some insight here on how games are actually put together, because this is going to kind of mess with you if you don't understand what I'm talking about. All right, so first things first. NVIDIA writes the architecture that games are written on, meaning the game makers, the developers program the games, but NVIDIA gives them the architecture to program on. So that's the first thing I need to get out of the way. What that means is games are always written on Intel processors with an NVIDIA graphics. Okay, that's how they're programmed. They use that architecture. That is why an RTX card can only use ray tracing. You will never see an AMD card be able to use ray tracing, because ray tracing is specific to NVIDIA. Same thing with path tracing. Same thing with DLSS. Same thing with PhysX. Not physics, PhysX. I can't even spell it. P-H-Y-S. Or sorry, I can't even fucking spell. Anyway, the point is that these are architectures strictly for NVIDIA. NVIDIA designed them. The reason why you never see the specs of a game listed with an AMD card is because it's not made with an AMD architecture at all, period. So anybody trying to state that the AMD processor runs better for gaming than an Intel has absolutely no idea what they're talking about, because in order to actually run a game properly, what you're testing the game on or with has to be done on the architecture that the game is written for. In this case, NVIDIA paired with an Intel processor, period. Anybody trying to argue that the AMD is better for gaming and everything else has no idea what they're talking about, because it's not written on AMD architecture. That is how it works. This would be the equivalency of trying to say a diesel car can run on unleaded gas. It doesn't work that way, because you may be able to run it, but it's going to run it either piss poorly or it's going to destroy the damn car. In this particular case, what's happening here with these benchmarks, and this is the first thing I'm going to talk about, is that the benchmarks are not accurate. People are under the illusion that AMD processors are somehow running the game better than an Intel because it somehow gets a higher frame rate per second and does other performance issues. That is an illusion, simply because AMD isn't actually making the game perform better, thus getting you higher FPS. What's happening here is the architecture that's in the games, AMD is, the processor for AMD actually isn't running it. It's not that AMD can't run the game. It can't run the same architecture because it's not designed that way, which means AMD is not running what the game is actually written on. It's not using the PhysX engine. It's not using the ray tracing. It's not using anything that AMD can recognize, period. So what's happening here is AMD is getting a boost in performance, not because it's a better chip. It's because it's not running certain architecture that the game is programmed with. So it's skipping that. That's not putting a bigger load on that CPU. So while you can sit there and argue, well, look at the numbers, show this, that, and the other thing, unless the game itself is written on AMD architecture, which it's not, AMD will never be able to get the same output as an Intel processor paired with an NVIDIA card. That is how this works. So people try to argue they can use an AMD card CPU while the game is not running the CPU. Has nothing to do with anything. The games are written on the architecture for Intel and NVIDIA, period. AMD, whether it's a GPU or a chip, will never be able to get the games functioning right. It doesn't work that way. So again, the numbers that people are showing are not accurate, and they're not real testing because they always keep pairing the AMD with the NVIDIA card instead of an NVIDIA card with an i9, or vice versa. Now, the thing with the PhysX engine is that the PhysX engine only works with the NVIDIA CUDA cores. So anybody using an Intel processor with an AMD GPU is still not running the game right. The only possible way you can run a game properly and get proper testing done is to pair the NVIDIA card with an Intel chip, period. Now, what I want to get out of the way is, for anybody that is testing Intel with NVIDIA, also is doing a disservice to everybody because they're only focusing and only doing tests with the 40 series cards, and then they're going to swap over to the 50 series cards, not understanding that unless you're doing tests with the 30 series cards, you're not giving a fair account of what this stuff is capable of doing, simply because you're missing those elements. Furthermore, not everybody has access to the 40 series cards, the good ones at least, the 490. And so what winds up happening here is people are skipping the 30 series, going to the 40 series, and then going possibly to the 50 series, and then saying, well, this is good for gaming. They're not giving realistic, real-world applications or results from what the average person has. Not everybody can afford a 3090, even to this day. Not anybody can afford a 3080 because they're basically missing. But not everybody's going to be able, if you can't afford a 3090, you're not going to be able to afford a 4060 or a 4070 Super or any of this other stuff, because that is way out of the budget of a lot of people. Another thing that's getting to me is that all of these tech channels are being given these cards. They're not buying them. Some of them, I can't say none of them are, but most of them are not buying these cards. They're having them being, and not a lot of them are buying these, the Ryzen chips either. They're having them sent to them by the company, so they get them for free. So all these people that are showing off these 4090 cards or anything else, it's just putting pressure on everybody else because they're just going by this is what this is for, and this is going to show you this, and this is the greatest, this is what you pair this with. I get news for everybody. I have a 3090 Ti in my computer paired with an i9 13900K. And I was listening to an idiot who was doing, I think it was benchmarking or something, but he was talking about how, he literally said it in his video, the 40 series cards have been out for 2 years, and once the 50 series cards comes out, about a month after the 50 series cards come out, the 40 series cards are going to be obsolete. And it's like, are you stupid? The 3090 isn't even obsolete. There is nothing on the face of this planet that can use the power of anything that's in my computer. Never mind the 40 series cards or these new chips or anything else. Therefore, anybody trying to I'm going to future-proof my computer. If you get a 30 series card with a 13th gen i7, you will have future-proofed your computer for at least the next 6 years. Because even when the 50 series cards start going out and NVIDIA introduces the 60 series cards, the 3090 series, the 30 series, or at least the 3090, will still not have had its potential hit. That's how this works. Because in order for that to happen, the software you're running has to max out the hardware potential that you have. And so far, nobody's going to do that. There is no company that's going to max out or basically force the maxing out of a software, like a game, because that means you would have to be able to purchase a $1,700 graphics card just to run the game, and the companies are not going to do that. I'm sorry, they're just not going to. So anybody trying to say, well, or trying to act like the 30 series is not good enough or anything else like that, or the i9 or the i7, 13th gens are out of whack, has no idea what they're talking about. Right now, again, I future-proof my computer, and I've had my computer built for basically almost a year and a half, 2 years now. And it is still running everything that's coming out. It doesn't have to run it at 4K. And speaking of 4K, I don't care what your system is using. You are not going to be able to get a game to run at 4K at 90 frames per second, even with a 4090 and these other chips. You just can't do it. So a lot of people that are trying to pull this shit or talk about this stuff don't have any idea what they're talking about, because number one, they don't know how the games are put together, and they don't realize that NVIDIA is in bed with Intel and the gaming companies. So AMD is not going to be able to top off NVIDIA no matter what anybody tries to tell you, simply because the architecture for games, if you're talking strictly on games, is written on NVIDIA and Intel architecture. You can sit and try to argue that point and try to sound smart all you want, but guess what? You're not going to be right on that, simply because that is not how this works. And as far as any YouTube channel trying to make it sound like, or make you feel like, or you've been put in the position of feeling like, oh crap, my hardware is becoming inferior, let me just tell you this. The Series 40 cards have only basically been out for about 2 years now, and now they're introducing the 50 series cards. Like, this stuff should be illegal. A company should not be able to put out a newer product unless they can, and then charge whatever price they're going to do. The price they're going to charge needs to reflect what the system is capable of doing, what the hardware is capable of doing. And in this particular case, unless you have something that can literally max out the hardware, which doesn't exist, then there's no way to prove that the price for this needs to be as high as it is. So in other words, if they're going to put out the Series 50 cards, there's nothing that can use the entire power of the 40 series, the 30 series cards, never mind the 40 series cards, but now you're talking about the 50 series cards. And unless they can prove that something can utilize the entire power of the 50 series cards, which they don't have there's no way to test that. The fact that the 30 series cards aren't even being touched at the potential yet, proves that there's no freaking way that the 50 series cards can be tested at that angle either. You can sit and say whatever you want by running benchmarks and running it. You are not going to be able to get anywhere near the maximum amount of full power out of my system, never mind anything else. So therefore, anybody trying to say, well, I got to get this and I got to get that, you're being stupid at this point. Anybody who's going to build this stuff, just get a 13th gen i7 or i9 or above. Get a Series 30 card and get yourself a DDR5 board with DDR5 RAM. Period. Once you do that, you will have future-proofed your computer for at least the next 8 years. Because, again, there is nothing on the face of this planet right now that can utilize the power in my system. And my system has lower components than the 40 series cards, or the supposed, I don't have an i9, 14900K. But the fact is, I don't need it. So that's basically all there is to it, and that's pretty much what I wanted to get out of the way. But all of these tech channels need to stop pushing this shit as if this is the best gaming CPU. No, it's not. Again, you're just getting that result as far as gaming goes because AMD is not picking up can't pick up the architecture that the game is written on, which is an Intel processor, not an AMD. So I don't care what you say, and I don't care how powerful this thing is. You are not getting accurate benchmarks, or you are not properly running the game unless you are pairing an Intel processor, 13th gen or higher, with an NVIDIA card with a minimal of 30 series cards paired with this on DDR5 RAM. That's it. There's no other way anybody's going to be able to argue this point no matter what you say. So that being said, there's my take on this, and this is the information that people asked me to give them. And one last thing, for those of you who still want to try to fucking argue this point, anybody that wants to argue this can go look at the game specs on anything that is related to NVIDIA. Powered by Intel, powered by NVIDIA, powered by, it has ray tracing and all this other stuff. Every time you see game specifications on your PC, you will never find an AMD as the processor. It's always an Intel, and there's a reason for that. Think I'm kidding? Go try to find on NVIDIA's site anywhere a game's minimum specs have to do, or graphic heavy, memory heavy games. You will not find AMD written there as the very first thing. It's always Intel, 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 Intel. Case in point, go look at, I think it's the new Metro game or something like that. I can't remember. But if you go look at it, you'll see that AMD can run the game, but it's not written on that. It's not written for that. Again, so people that want to argue, there is a reason why Intel is always listed as the processor on an NVIDIA site when it comes to games, as far as performance-wise and things like that, specs. Anything else after that is written from a half-assed standpoint of view. But again, you will always see Intel paired with NVIDIA, simply because that's how games are run. So again, people are giving it I know I keep beating a dead horse with this, but AMD is not running the game faster or more proficient. What it's doing is it's running the game without the stuff that's written for Intel, because I guarantee you, if the game was written on an AMD architecture the same way it was with an Intel architecture, the AMD would not be getting the benchmarks they're getting. They would be around what the i9s are. Guarantee it. And that being said, that's all I got to say. Gamer signing out. Have a good one.